What hints did you pick up on that led you to a wild night? Story 1. A few years ago I was chatting with a good friend of mine about how reluctant my ex was to perform certain intimate acts. My friend, visibly puzzled, said she didn't understand that refusal at all, and then quite boldly added that she, on the contrary, had absolutely no problem with it. I'm not lying, it left me pretty stunned. Not long after that conversation, one of those many nights we spent together watching movies and having drinks, at some point I instinctively put my arm around her shoulder and kissed her on the cheek. To my surprise, she reciprocated and we started really making out. She climbed on top of me and, after some foreplay, decided to do exactly the thing my ex had always refused. It was an incredible experience and it became a recurring thing, although we always kept certain boundaries. It was one of the very few, if not the only, times I've seen friends with benefits not ruin a perfectly good friendship. Story 2. I remember one day in high school during PE class. It was raining, so they made us run laps inside the gym. There was this lovely girl running next to me and little by little we started chatting. Suddenly her friends came up behind us and began chanting in unison, "Mandy's a virgin. Mandy's a virgin." Mandy, clearly annoyed, shouted back at full volume, "I'm working on it." Even I, who was right beside her, understood her perfectly in the moment, and trust me, I can be pretty slow sometimes. Story 3. In my final year of university, a few friends and I ended up at the apartment of two girls. We'd been drinking in the afternoon and one of them suggested, in a tone I completely failed to read at the time, that if we wanted, we could sleep in her room. In my innocence I thought she was just being hospitable, offering her bed while I'd take the living room sofa. So, wanting to be polite, I said, "No thanks, I'll sleep in the living room." She went off to her room while the rest of us settled in the living room. Her flatmate, looking confused, asked me why I hadn't gone to sleep in her room when it was pretty obvious that's what the girl wanted. I explained I thought she was going to sleep in the living room. Everyone immediately told me I should go to her room because I was clearly welcome there. The problem? By the time I finally went in, she was already asleep. Not wanting to look like a creep and not wanting to return to the living room with my pride wounded, I decided to sleep on the floor. At some point she woke up, saw me, and pretended not to. Maybe she felt awkward. I woke up very early and left quickly, hoping she wouldn't notice. Still, she invited me back the next night, and that time everything that was supposed to happen happened. 5 years later, we're not married, but we live together and have 2 children. Story 4. There was a coworker I used to flirt with a lot. One day she jokingly said she'd be willing to have some fun with me in exchange for a pack of cigarettes. She also told me, back when I still had a girlfriend, what her favorite positions were. Later, when I became single, that information turned out to be very useful, if you know what I mean. For several years we kept a solid friends with benefits arrangement, but the best part was always her honesty and how easy she was to communicate with in bed. We're still good friends to this day. On a different occasion, another girl once confessed she loved being kissed on the neck. Much later, on our first date, while we were making out, I started kissing her neck. Honestly, I had completely forgotten she ever told me that. I was just lost in the moment. I wasn't even planning on going further that night. Then she whispered how much it turned her on when someone kissed her neck. That was the exact moment I knew I was in for an unforgettable night of mischief in the backseat of the car. Story 5. On our first date she said something that made me smile. Inviting you to my place doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have sex. Of course it didn't have to mean that, although curiously that's exactly what ended up happening. The next day we both called in sick and spent the whole day together enjoying each other's company. 11 years later we're still very good friends. We never made it official, but the connection we created that night still endures. Story 6. About 3 weeks ago I decided to try my first camping experience. I've always considered myself a city guy with zero interest in the outdoors. Still, I felt like I needed to be able to say I'd camped at least once in my life. I didn't own a single piece of camping gear, so a girl from our group, who happens to be the maid of honor at an upcoming wedding where I'm the best man, decided to bring extra equipment for me. The first night I found myself alone in a two-person tent. Around 1 a.m. someone knocked on the entrance and politely asked if I could scoot over because she couldn't sleep. Everyone in her 8-person tent was snoring like crazy. Obviously I didn't mind. I was extremely grateful. Without her I'd have been sleeping on the grass getting eaten alive by bugs. So she came in, and I noticed she wasn't wearing shorts or sweatpants, just an oversized t-shirt from our old high school. It struck me as odd because it was pretty cold, but I figured maybe that's just how she sleeps. We chatted for a bit. She asked how work was going and if I was enjoying camping so far. I said it was alright, nice to get away from the city once in a while. Then, out of nowhere she said, "I've never had sex in a tent before." And, well, you can probably guess what happened next. Story 7. I finished work as usual and headed to our regular Friday bar where my friends and I always meet up. But this particular Friday was different. None of my friends showed up, and the place was unusually quiet for peak socializing hours. Curious, I asked the bartender where everyone was. He had no clue. Right then a girl who was at the bar chimed in. "Well, I'm here." So I bought her a drink. We've been together ever since. Story 8. A few years ago, after being away from my hometown for a while, I decided to move back. I practiced Kung Fu, so I was looking for a place to keep training. Luckily, I found a good dojo right in my old city. There I ran into an old high school friend. He suggested we grab drinks and catch up, so a few days later we went out bar hopping. We were planning to go to a place called Abyss, but on the way we passed another bar called Animations. I glanced through the window and saw a very attractive, well-dressed blonde woman sitting alone. Still, we decided to hit Abyss first since it was quieter, have a few beers, and then maybe swing by Animations later to see if the blonde was still there. And she was. Still alone. We went in, ordered beers, sat next to her and asked why she was by herself. She explained she'd arranged to meet a guy she met online, but he either ghosted her or took one look and bailed. Hard to believe the latter. The three of us started drinking and chatting. Without warning, she put her hand on my knee under the table. I responded by placing my hand on her knee, only for her to immediately grab my hand and move it straight to her ass. I looked at my friend. He read the room perfectly and left. She then suggested we step outside for a cigarette. The second we were out the door, she showed me a lot more than I expected. In my drunken state, I told her my apartment was just around the corner. That was the first and last time I ever saw her. She was around 39, I was about 26. When I woke up the next morning, she was already gone. A very unique experience to say the least. Story 9. During most of high school, I was in a pretty long relationship that ended at the beginning of my first year of university. Years later, I reconnected with a girl from high school who I'd always found quite attractive, but never pursued because I already had a girlfriend. One night we decided to catch up over dinner. After eating, I suggested we keep the night going by watching a movie at my place. I genuinely had no ulterior motives. I hadn't even considered anything happening. But when I proposed it, she gave this knowing little laugh, and somehow I just knew she thought my intention was to sleep with her. And yet she still said yes. So I thought, if she thinks that's what I'm trying to do, and she's okay with it, why not actually try? So I did. She was very much on board and we had a great time. Story 10. We were at a hotel with some mutual friends enjoying the afternoon. When my buddies and I were about to head to the bar, we walked past the pool area. There was a really attractive girl in the water who had clearly had a few too many. She called out in a playful voice, "Does anyone want to swim with me?" No one else seemed interested, nobody had brought swimwear, but I took it as a clear signal. So I skipped the bar, jumped in the pool fully clothed with her. We ended up losing the clothes, had an intimate moment in the water, and spent a very passionate night together. 16 years later, we're happily married. Thank God I knew how to read the hint. Story 11. A few years ago I invited a girl and some friends over to watch a horror movie at my place. In the end, none of my friends showed up, but she did. Without thinking much of it, I offered her a beer while we got ready for the movie. She smiled and asked, "Are you having one too?" I casually explained that my driver's license was still on probation, so I had to keep my blood alcohol at 0. Even one beer would put me over the limit and then I wouldn't be able to drive her home after the movie. Understanding the situation perfectly, she grabbed another beer, opened it, and handed it to me without saying a word. I think it's pretty clear what happened next. Story 12. We were on a date browsing the dessert menu at TGI Fridays, but nothing really caught our eye. She suggested we could buy something at the store on the way home to eat while watching a movie. She parked, she was driving, looked at me completely seriously, though with a very mischievous little smile, and said, "Go get some whipped cream and chocolate syrup." I looked at her confused for a second. Then the penny dropped. I ran into the store like my life depended on it and grabbed 2 bottles of Hershey's chocolate syrup. Let's just say the dessert that night was outstanding, and how could it not have been? Story 13. One of my strangest yet most epic nights happened at a restaurant. I was sitting with a lovely girl and a group of friends, everyone more than a little tipsy. The girl, being playful and fun, confessed she was in an open relationship, which led to a very interesting conversation. At one point she jokingly poked me in the arm with a toothpick. I reacted surprised. "Did you just poke me?" She challenged me back. "What, are you gonna poke me back?" I tried to grab the toothpicks, but she wouldn't let me have them and kept them away using her legs. So I played along, running my hands up her legs, but she didn't move away. Then she hid the toothpicks in her cleavage and dared me to take one with my mouth. I went for it. By this point our only sober friend, who was driving us home, was already quite annoyed with our antics and decided it was time to leave. While walking to the car she lifted her skirt and showed me what was underneath. I responded by unbuttoning my shirt. Things escalated quickly in the car. When we got to my place she unexpectedly decided to get out with me. Our friend just shrugged and drove off. We didn't make it straight to the bedroom. We stopped at the kitchen counter, the sofa, the coffee table, the dining table, before finally reaching the bed. One of the wildest and most unforgettable nights of my life. Story 14. I had just gotten home from high school and was standing at the entrance of my house with a girl I'd just met. We were talking about how weird it is that some people spend the whole day without moving or even taking a short walk, then complain about being out of shape. Casually, she connected it to us and said something like, "Look at us, we're both pretty active people and in good shape. Who knows, maybe one day we could do some exercise together." I'll be honest, I don't remember much of what was said after that, but the hint was crystal clear. And I acted on it again when, past midnight, she showed up at my college apartment looking for a place to crash that night. Story 15. One night a friend and I were out partying and drinking. Fortunately, my brain managed to sober up just enough to remember bits and pieces. At some point we started talking about her body, especially her breasts. I won't lie, they were spectacular. With the confidence alcohol gives you, I soon asked if I could see them. She just looked at me and said, "You're not going to take pictures, right?" Next thing I remember is her standing naked in front of me. I think I even asked if I could touch them. And there I was, completely mesmerized. She ended up sitting on my couch. We talked about a tattoo I didn't know she had, and suddenly we were making out. Then she mentioned she was on her period and suggested we take a shower. We ended up in the shower where things got even more intimate. Though I have to admit the alcohol wasn't helping, I could barely stand and kept losing my balance. The inevitable end of the night came when I ended up vomiting in the sink. Still, it was an epic night in every possible sense. Story 16. It was my first date with this girl and her friend was there for a little while. Suddenly the friend blurted out, "If you leave marks on her, I'm going to be mad." I froze, completely confused. Did she think I was going to hurt her or something? So I awkwardly replied, "Are we talking about mischief marks?" The girl in question quickly jumped in laughing and said, "But I actually like those kinds of marks." I couldn't help but blush. And well, let's just say the night ended up being very eventful. Story 17. One afternoon in university, while hanging out with a friend, we started talking about how long it had been since either of us had been with someone. Given how tragic the situation was, we made a pact. That night, no matter what happened at the party, neither of us was going home alone. The party was in full swing and we knew almost everyone there. At one point, in the middle of the chaos, I asked her if she'd found someone to go home with. She said no and asked me the same question. With the liquid courage flowing, I just went for it. "What if we leave and go home together?" To my surprise, she simply said, "Okay." What started as a casual suggestion at a college party turned into something much bigger. 4.5 years later, she's still my girlfriend. So much so that I moved to Europe to attend the same graduate university as her. I can confidently say this woman will be my wife.